please welcome SandboxVR President and Chief Product Officer, Siqi Chen.
Hey everybody, thanks for coming. I really wanted to talk about analytics today, but Spencer said nobody would be interested in that at this conference, so he wanted me to talk about pioneering change, so we'll see how it goes. I love analytics, as I just mentioned. I love data. I'm a data nerd. I presume everyone here feels the same way. And I think one of the reasons why I like it is analytics and data is about making things better in an improvable way, making numbers go up, products better, your user experience better. And better usually means change. And we spend a lot of time talking about what is better and how do we know things are better, but we probably don't spend enough time talking about the change that is required to actually ship things that are better. So I'm here to talk about that. Let's start with what is change? The conventional understanding of change is you have a good idea, everyone rallies around it because the idea is so awesome, it gets built, it gets done, and change happens. But I think the experience of change that we're all more familiar with is we have an awesome idea, and people think it's really dumb, and they're really scared, and they think it's a lot of work, and everyone has their own priorities, so change doesn't happen. And so my understanding of change is about influence. It's about influencing other human beings to take a particular course of action that is hopefully good, depending on your judgment, but doesn't have to be. There's plenty of bad changes that happen all the time. And what that means is change is ultimately about politics, which is kind of scary because everyone knows that politics is bad, and toxic. I'm certainly one of those people. I was an engineer as my first job, and the idea of office politics, it felt like that. But over the course of my career, as I've worked on products in different companies, large and small, I've come to understand that politics is neither toxic nor untoxic. It just kind of is a thing. It's reality, and it's a thing that just exists whenever there's more than two people in the same room. And there's no kind of organization that has more politics than the apolitical organization, because you're just kind of hiding these very real human social dynamics under the table. And what that means is change is super messy, because it's about people, other people, and feelings. And feelings are always messy. But I have a picture of Lincoln here because one of my favorite movies is the 2012 Lincoln movie by Spielberg. Everyone should watch it because Daniel Day-Lewis does an awesome job of being Lincoln, but also it was remarkable just how messy it took to pass something like the Emancipation Proclamation. It was carrot and the stick. It was cajoling. And I think that's a really real story of what change is like, particularly very difficult, big changes in the real world. So it's super messy, it's super hard. What are the instruments of change, and how can you use them effectively to make change happen? The way I think about change is there's two big buckets of tools. There's hard power and soft power. Hard power is force and capital. And it's basically, if you don't do this, I will shoot you with my gun, or if you don't do this, I will fire you. And there's only so many times you can get away with that, which is precisely zero in any reasonable organization. So that's not super interesting, right? The sustainable way to drive change is through the other bucket, soft power. And the way I think about that is, it's basically about who you are, what you know, and what other people think about you. So what you call charisma, or your ability to communicate and influence people, is inherently in your personality. Your knowledge and skills, that hopefully truth is that which has predictive power. So these are things that you know and are also correct. And then there's reputation and credibility, which is what other people think about you. And through the tactful and sustainable use of all three of these things are we able to successfully drive change. So I want to tell a story about my job before my current one, which was a VP of growth at Postmates. So I joined Postmates in 2016 when they acqui-hired my last company. I was a big fan of the brand, very early user, and it was growing very quickly. It still is, but it's worth about $500 million. I haven't been there for a year and a half, so I hope it is. But when I came in, very, very excited. I understood the product. It's get anything from anywhere, food to my house. That's something I want. But what was super surprising is we didn't have a very good understanding, a number that we could trust it for, what the conversion rate from an app install to a delivery was. And coming from my 2 gigs before that, I was head of product at a company called Zynga. We made games on Facebook, basically. And everything was instrumented in super detailed. And so was the company that they acquired. And so a natural reaction, which I had, was, this is terrible. Like, what? How do you not know this as such a big company? But I tried to set that aside, and I chose an equally valid way to respond to it, which is, that is fascinating, right? Like, my company raised a bunch of money, completely failed, and I'm working for this company that doesn't know this very basic piece of information. I put that in perspective with my Zynga experience, which is it was an incredibly data-driven culture, probably the most data-driven culture. And we kind of all know how that story ended, which is, if you're super data-driven, you can overfit and optimize for a particular ecosystem, evolutionary speaking, which is what happened to Zynga, right? The ecosystem changed from Facebook and social to mobile, and it over-optimized for that, and it struggled. And I think it's done a lot of work to come back over the past couple of years, but that was a existential risk for Zynga. And so I actually appreciated differences, genuinely, at Postmates. Maybe it was a little too far in the other direction, but I can work with that. So if you want to drive change, I think the first thing you have to do is know the context. Because if you don't know the context, it's very hard to know where to go and to influence people to have change happen. And the questions that are useful to ask is like, well, why is it this way? What are the motivations and beliefs that got us here? And I think the next one's the most important thing. What are the good intentions that got us here? Because people usually aren't stupid, and people usually have positive intentions. And so if something is bad, if you understand the context well enough, you can understand why we got there, right? And particularly who was involved, because you're going to have to talk to these people, because they tend to be existing stakeholders. And what is working well, because nothing is universally bad, right? There's always a benefit, right? So even though we didn't have really good data, we had a strong brand, it was a design-led company, and the product was great, and people liked it. And so to get good answers from these questions, you really do have to be genuinely curious. Talk to people around the org, look at old specs, look at old designs, look at old docs. And if you can sufficiently understand it, then you can show genuine appreciation. Not made up, like genuine. I genuinely appreciated what Postmates got to the table because, one, the company existed, it had product market fit, and two, it recognized that it had this limitation, and was a large part of the reason why the acquisition made sense to them. And if you can do it, you can avoid making people feel bad because nobody likes feeling bad. We want change to happen, usually because we think the status quo could be a lot better. But nobody wants to feel that they made a series of bad decisions or less good decisions. And if you truly understand the context, again, at the moment and with the context, it probably wasn't that bad of a decision in the first place. And I think this is probably the biggest mistake that more junior growth people make. The condescending asshole growth PM is like a real trope, right? Which is like, the data god's gift to your company. And this is not what anybody wants to work with. So if you understand the context, you can genuinely appreciate what's working. And if you can't find it, you probably don't understand it well enough. So we didn't have any data, or at least data we could trust. What do we do? Because I was running a growth team and we still need that data. So how do we solve this? And so we just kind of took a risk, put together an extremely small team. My small team was like me, Tanner, who currently works at Amplitude, and one engineer. And we just worked week after week after week, putting together the growth stack, validating the events, making sure we had it. And it was hilarious, but not hilarious, because we were a growth team, and every week it was like, well, where's the growth? And we're like, well, we're logging stuff, I guess. So that was great. It was not fun. Almost got fired, I'm pretty sure. But as you can imagine, though, with a company of that size, if you have a better understanding of data, there is just low-hanging fruit everywhere. And so it paid off eventually. We got the instrumentation done. We shipped some double-digit % improvements in conversion. And everyone forgot that we weren't delivering growth for a little bit. And that was great. So if you want to drive change, it's useful to take some risks. And this is about investing your social capital so that you can grow it. So it allows you to drive even bigger changes. Right? That's what social capital is about. It's about buying low, selling high. You start with small bets, and hopefully by virtue of you being correct, maybe, not all the time, you build that social capital, and then you can take bigger bets. But that's what accountability is, right? If you're not right, then you don't get to take bigger bets, and that's fine. All right, so now we have some data. That's great. We made some improvements. Now we want to do some testing. We wanted to understand the consequences of word shipping and making sure that the rest of the organization can also be data informed. And so excitedly, I was talking to the company about getting an A/B testing process in place, and someone influential of the company verbatim said this to me, yeah, no, be very careful with that word. A/B testing is a bad word here. I know it's weird, just don't say that word. I was like, okay. The context of that is, again, brand and design-led organization, and the standard operating procedure is you should have a conviction and opinion and go execute on it. And I actually totally agree with this, because again, at Zynga, it was not like that at all. And I think, testing 42 shades of blue is no way to live or create any product. So, when you're over-focused on data, you actually have tunnel vision, and because when you are too data-driven, you ignore things that are difficult to measure, specifically things that take a long time to measure, like long-term retention, or things that are very difficult to measure, like user sentiment and word of mouth. But, we have opinions, and that's great, and we're going to execute on them, but shouldn't we know what happened if we ship something? We're going to spend a lot of engineering time to do it. And I still felt that that is a reasonable thing to ask for. But A/B testing is a bad word, so kind of rock and hard place. What do we do? And so we built what we call the rollout framework. And it's the framework that we use to ship new, yeah, you guys already know what it is. Yeah. It's the framework we use to ship new features to understand the impact of what happened. Yes, it is an A/B testing framework. Literally exactly what it is. And we were in meetings where we talked about, oh yeah, the rollout framework proved X% lift in Y. And all of a sudden, everyone loved it. Everyone loved shipping things. Everyone loved rolling things out. And now pretty much 100% of what we shipped gets rolled out or A/B tested. So if you want to drive change, it's really useful to speak the right language and use the right words. I think it's important to never underestimate the power of words. Lingo, words, this is what makes up culture. And these words are what we use to identify the in-group from the out-group. And it's very difficult to affect change when you're not part of the in-group from the outside. So using the right words, understanding context, helps you make sure that you are part of the in-group because it's just easier. And the great thing about words is that you can always use new ones. You can change them. A lot of the times, you'll find that people aren't against a good thing, right? Like understanding what happened is undeniably a good thing. But there's sometimes so much institutional baggage to a word that it's useful to just use a different one, like rollout instead of A/B. All right, so we have data. We have an A/B testing framework. People are using it. We ship some features. Great. Now we want to do more growth at Postmates, have a team, work with the rest of the organization. How do we do that? One of the things that we repeated over and over again as a team is we never block, we always help, right? We never want to be the team that says, oh, don't ship that thing because you're going to tank our numbers. We were the complete opposites, like, please ship it, and also we can help you know what happened, right? And so we found all kinds of ways to be helpful. We can, we work with different teams to help them understand what is happening with their business now, what happened when they ship something, and what are they curious about, because, not to plug Amplitude, but to plug Amplitude, like, you can be super curious about things, and we literally sat in meetings where a question came up with some other team, and we clicked around, it's like, oh, here's the answer. And they're like, wow, this is really useful. And so the growth team started with 3 people, myself, Sounding, a growth engineer, and Tanner. Again, mostly working on logging. We kind of just tried to be helpful for 10 months, grew and shipped features, help other teams, and 10 months later, the team was just under 100 people, and we're running consumer product and growth, user acquisition, and growth engineering, and most interestingly, field operations, so all the local GMs somehow report into growth. And this is something we actively argued against because I really just wanted to look at numbers all day. That's who I am, that's what I love doing, but we really got the support of the entire company, and I think a large part because we wanted to be super helpful. So if you want to drive change, it's useful to be very helpful, because the unspoken question with most people, with everyone, myself included, is like, at any given point in time, it's what's in it for me, right? Nobody likes change that they didn't drive, but everyone doesn't mind being helped to do the things that they want to do. And if you can keep this in mind, you can avoid doing something which is trying to prove how correct you are or why certain things are better, because this is also something that we believe, is that you can't convince anybody of anything they don't already want to believe. Because if you're trying to focus on being right and how you're better, the result is usually negative feelings of condescension, which is really common, right? One of the most common questions with growth is, how do I work with these other teams that are like less smart because they don't have data? It's like, well, I don't want to work with you. So yeah, we wouldn't evangelize the tools. We would just try to use them and prove that they're useful, right? So we would be able to show it, hey, for the first time, we can statistically significantly show that this feature did X. And it's like, that seems pretty useful. Maybe another team will want to do the same. And so this is how we saw ourselves, to be at your service. And I often think, like, if in an organization all the teams did this, where they felt like, I am at the service of all the other teams, wouldn't that be a pretty fun, decent organization to work at? And so that is something that I try to keep in mind when I'm working with other teams as well. So yeah, change is about influence. Change is about politics. It's very, very messy, and these are some things that work for me. I think it was pretty effective at Postmates. We went from an organization that before didn't have basic data, where A/B testing is a bad word, to one where every feature pretty much, at least when I left, was A/B tested voluntarily, I think. And also where most of the company was actually looking at data. And the things that work for me in particular is understand the context, show genuine appreciation for the status quo of that context, take some measure of risk, know how to speak the language, and above all, be helpful. And I hope these things will work for you too. Thank you.